Okay, welcome. Thank you so much for coming. We're really honored to have Professor Andreas Bouroutis with us this evening. He has taught twice at Michigan State University before, and for those of you students are here who are interested and excited by the lecture, he'll be teaching two courses in the fall. One, History 411, that's European Jewish history, and the other is an ISS class on war and revolution, but which also focuses on the history of Romanian Jews in various ways. Both classes do. So you have those two opportunities if you want to delve deeper into this. I'm Professor Yael Aronoff, and I direct the Sterling Institute for Jewish Studies in Modern Israel. That is the main sponsor for this event, but it's also co-sponsored by James Madison College and the College of Arts and Letters, the Residential College of Arts and Humanities, International Studies and Programs, the History Department, and the Center for European and Eurasian Studies. So we're really lucky to have those co-sponsorships. Basically, we're privileged to have this lecture from the Ada Weintraub Finifter Endowment in the Jewish Studies Institute. And she was a professor at MSU whose grandparents were Romanian Jews from Greece, and they immigrated in 1905 to New York City. And she established this so that we could have research and teaching and programming in this area. And I know her brother Leon watches the recording, so thank you to you. And for any students, and then I'll introduce Professor Bouroutis, who are interested in perhaps learning more about the Jewish Studies minor at MSU, you can often double count classes. You're welcome to come to a reception on Monday. We'll have a pizza with current minors in B. Wells, room 441. And you can meet with other people who are interested, learn more about the classes and scholarships and so forth. So we're really thrilled to have you talk about the Jewish properties in Greece, confiscation, exploitation, and restitution from 1943 to 1950. The lecture examines the relations between the Greek state and the Greek Jews in the post-war period and argues that the year 1949 was a crucial one for the restitution of order in the country. The provisions of international bodies such as the United Nations and the Council of Europe for the Protection of Civil and Human Rights turn out to be extremely helpful. So Professor Bouroutis has a very long resume, but I'll just give you some very quick highlights. He's a historian, political scientist, and a lecturer at the Hellenic Open University in Greece. And he is a visiting fellow of the Sterling Institute for Jewish Studies in Modern Israel and the Department of History, and a member of the Center for European and Eurasian Studies at MSU. He's a leading scholar in the field of Jewish studies, and he's the author of 4 monographs and of several articles in Greece and abroad about the Jewish communities of Greece and the Holocaust. His book, Holocaust in Thessaloniki, he also has The Jewish Students of Umberto Primo School and the Italian Stance, which was published in 2020, and it was shortlisted for the Greek National Book Prize Award. And his book, The Jewish Fortunes, I'm just almost done giving some highlights. State and Collaboration in Greece, 1943 to 1949, is in its second edition. That was published in 2023. And his latest scientific article, Greece, the Jews, and the Middle East Question, was recently published at the Journal of Modern Jewish Studies in 2025. So we're honored to have you back, and thank you for being here.
So thank you very much for being here. I would like to thank Sterling Institute and Director Yael Aronoff for this invitation and also the opportunity, because I had the time during these days to do some research in your library. It's very rich. Trust me, it's extremely helpful, and especially for you students, you have to be there every day. And also the environment is very good. I haven't had this opportunity during my student years. So and I'm talking for the students, you're probably going to hear some names, but you have to focus on the main issues of this lecture that has to do with the confiscation of Jewish properties during the occupation period in Europe, okay? So the example at that point is Greece, all right? So you will find it more easily to comprehend the whole situation if you're going to see the chronological steps that goes all the way from the confiscation, the exploitation, and the looting of the Jewish properties, all the way after the war, okay, in the post-war period, and the final restitution of them, okay? For all the others, and for all of you, this is something like a new research that it came recently in light, because up to 2020, we didn't have any clue what happened in the Jewish properties in general. I'm talking about movable wealth and the real estate properties. What we knew in public history was that everything perished, that it was looted and nothing returned to the beneficiaries of these properties, meaning if they survived, very few survived the Holocaust, or their heirs, meaning the descendants and the relatives that could apply for these properties. So the truth is that in public history in general, first of all, we didn't talk a lot about Jewish issues in the post-war period because the Holocaust was a tremendous loss for the Jewish communities of Greece, because up to close to 87% of the Jewish population of Greece perished, and especially in Thessaloniki, that it was almost 50,000 people, less than 2,000 people remained alive after the end of the war. That practically means, in terms of figures, in about 96% loss. So it wasn't forbidden, but it was quite embarrassing, especially after the war. You know that things, in 1946, we got engaged in a civil war, so the focus shifted. But even afterwards, when people were trying to get back to their lives, you know, reconstruct the country, all these were considered to be, you know, not in the agenda. The whole situation turned back in the focus of light after the 1980s. To be honest, one of the major points to see how media supports this, I mean, even not, you know, scientifically, but the TV series Holocaust played a role also in Greece when it was aired in the public TV channel. However, the scholarship for the Jewish matters flourished after 2000, meaning that we had a considerable delay in touching these issues in Greece. For the Jewish fortunes, the crucial point was in 2020. This is at the time that I received a grant to do research about the Jewish properties in Thessaloniki. It was a very specific grant from the state, almost $150,000, that we had the chance, even that it was COVID pandemic, for the first time, we had the chance to research in an archive that was completely closed till that time for researchers. So it was the first time that someone got in, got the permission, and I was able to do the research. And it was enlightening. I mean, you're going to see the result. Okay? So afterwards, whoever's going to have questions, please go ahead, and I'm talking especially for the students, okay? Because probably it's going to be, some things can be difficult for you to understand them, okay? Since 1941, Greece suffered the triple occupation by Italy in the blue color, Bulgaria on the green color, and Germany in the red color of the country. Thessaloniki, that it's, I don't have the beamer, Thessaloniki, it's in the north side, here. Thessaloniki became part of the German occupation zone, and most probably because it was the birthplace and housed more than 50,000 Jews, earning by that the nickname Jerusalem of the Balkans. It was the greatest Jewish community in all the Balkan Peninsula. In February 1943, we have the last phase of the Jewish drama in the city with the arrival of a special unit of the SS and military police, led by Captains Dieter Wisliceni and Alois Brunner, and the enforcement of several racial decrees, the racial legislation. The two SS officers belonged administratively to Adolf Eichmann's group in Office 4B4. As it is known, Eichmann's autonomous office was responsible for Jewish affairs in general in Europe. The community of Thessaloniki was the largest center of Sephardic culture, and its liquidation proved to be an important target of the Nazis. So Eichmann, that is why, he sent not one, that it was the usual scenario, but two of his most entrusted men to confirm that they will carry out their task to the fullest extent. So carrying out a German order by the German military administration, Chancellor of Thessaloniki, Dr. Maximilian Merten, that he wasn't a Nazi. So by that we can understand the cooperation of Nazi and non-Nazi officers in the whole procedure. Just a week before the onset of the deportation, the Governor General of Macedonia, Vasilis Simonidis, a Greek guy, issued a ministerial decree for the establishment of YDIP, the Service for the Disposal of Jewish Properties. And its supervising bodies, like the board of it, special subcommittees on the appointments of entrusted people. YDIP became the state's legal entity for the confiscation and exploitation of the Jewish properties in Thessaloniki. Ilias Douros, an executive of the Ministry of Finance and administrator of the real estate office in Thessaloniki, was appointed as the director of YDIP. The haste to quickly implement the procedure is evident by the fact that YDIP officially, its legal status was acquired in the beginning of June 1943, practically 3 months after its unofficial establishment. As it is most probably known, the displacement began on March 15, 1943. It marks the beginning of the last chapter of the Jewish drama in the history of the Jews of Thessaloniki. The cruelty and acts of violence on board, as well as the barbarous conditions, with 60 people per animal wagon, they were transported in cattle cars for animals, okay? In the transportation to take from Greece, at least 5-6 days journey, all the way to go to Auschwitz in Poland. With scant provision caused great commotion. Such was the extent of the deception and exploitation that the Jews were obliged to pay even the one-way fare ticket for the nightmarish journey to Poland and their death. A total of 2,800 people were included in the first transport. Of these, 2,191 immediately ended up in the gas chambers, while the remaining 609 were quarantined until they began working in the camp as death workers. With a total of 19 trains, more than 56,000 Jews were deported. Less than 2,000 people, 1,950, of Thessaloniki Jewish community remained alive after the end of the war, even if there were few tens of them came back from the death camps. All the others usually were either in hideouts or they joined the rebels, the partisans, in the mountains. To get back to the fate of the Jewish properties, the whole procedure in the confiscation of them was rather simple. YDIP, the new state agency, proceeded with groups of specialists in inventories of all the Jewish commercial properties, stores, shops, warehouses, outlets, and enterprises in general. A total evaluation of each property was carried out in pre-war values and during the war, because we had the skyrocketed inflation during this period. The same applied for Jewish houses and residences. Practically all Jewish owned or rented professional establishments and households were placed under the jurisdiction of YDIP. The next step was all Jewish outlets to be given to individuals or agencies that they were named caretakers or custodians or trustees, Greek Christians. These caretakers had to pay a rent to YDIP at the benefit of the Greek state, and they were accountable for the management of the Jewish premises and their contents. For residential purposes, this is also important, particularly in light of the thousands of Greek refugees from the green zone that they left after the occupation by the Bulgarians. It was quite harsh. Many of the evacuated Jewish homes were allocated in displaced families, Greek Christian families, practically meaning that 3, 4, 5 sometimes Greek families were living in the Jewish houses. The next step was, however, the Jewish enterprises, since this was a profitable operation, this is also crucial, scores of people tried to be appointed as caretakers, and the Germans supervised and guided the whole operation. So it was a quite profitable one. The best out of the Jewish establishments were given to Greek collaborators and associates of the Germans, and the Germans themselves participated in the whole looting of the properties. What happened in the meantime of the evacuation of the Jewish households and enterprises by the residents and the owners, and the deportation of them, and the appointment of the new caretakers, is a dark page of the local history, since a general plunder was noted. Individuals, even neighbors and people of the next door, and groups of people stormed the houses and the Jewish enterprises, looting everything, all the movable wealth. The German authorities threatened with executions on the spot to stop this anarchy. Contrary, they promoted orders so the whole procedure would be more official and undoubtful. Georgios Ioannou, Thessaloniki's prolific writer, described in his books the looting of the Jewish properties by the next door's people. So I quote, "Izo, together with his showing family, left a horrible morning dressed and serious as a groom." He was a 15-year-old child, as Georgios Ioannou. On his chest, he was almost proud of the yellow star. Immediately afterwards, the entire apartment building whipped away its stairs, struggled up to the second floor, and threw itself as hypnotized on the Jewish family possessions. Their rich house was full of clothes and furniture. The Christian roommate next door, who a little while ago was taking the heaviest vows, something precious it seems had been entrusted to her, threw herself on Izo's seats, still warm from his youthful sleep. Then they turned to more serious stuff. The walnut table was dragged away by others, the wardrobes, the chest of drawers, the bedside tables, the mirrors, and the cracked china heater fell apart in the hands of an old man and his wife as they dragged it down the hall. I close the quote. Research highlighted in recent years the extent of the looting when Jews left their homes to be taken to the transit gate of Bouroutis that was placed next to the train station, and then their deportation to Auschwitz. During these days, all kinds of movable property were sold off by every means and in every way. Trucks drove through Thessaloniki's periphery and in the nearby areas, and the villages selling the looted goods from the homes, shops, and enterprises of Jewish families. As I previously said, the German authorities, trying to limit this kind of looting, issued strict orders, since even in the Jewish poor neighborhoods, scores of people and gangs dug into the sacks looking for gold. After the Italian capitulation on 7th September 1943, so all the blue color, that it was part of the Italian occupation zone, Germany assumed occupation of the Greek territories. Italy capitulated on the beginning of September 1943 and changed, at the course of the events, changed sides and became an ally to the Western Alliance, okay, to the Americans and the British. So Germans assumed all responsibility of occupation in the rest of the country, including the capital of the country, Athens. So Law 1180 in 1944, following the implementation of another law, extended the management of Jewish properties to the rest of Greece under German occupation. Law 1180 created the Central Service for the Disposal of Jewish Properties, named YDIP, and its supervision was entrusted to the Greek Minister of Finance. So the whole operation, as described for Thessaloniki, took place in all towns of the rest of Greece with sizable Jewish communities. The deportation of the Jews started on late March 1944, almost a year after Thessaloniki's deportations, and lasted till a few weeks before the retreat of the German troops from Greece. In some cases, like in the Romaniot community of Yanina and the island of Corfu, that it's in the western part of the country, the percentage loss of Jewish population, numbering more than 1,500 people each, reached percentages exceeding 90%. Okay, less than 10%, probably 130 to 140 people remained alive after the end of the war. Bulgaria, for its part, the green color occupation zone, since early March 1943, before Thessaloniki's deportation, had also proceeded for its benefit and for Bulgarian subjects and companies to liquidate the Jewish properties in the Greek regions that occupied towns like Xeres, Kavala, Komotini, Drama. The percentage of loss of Jews in some towns reached the maximum of 100%. That practically means that the entire communities were wiped out during the deportation of them and in the extermination camp of Treblinka. What happened after the war? After the Germans retreated in Greece's liberation in October 1944, the new government annulled all occupation-era legislation. In theory, this signaled a return of confiscated Jewish properties to the rightful owners and the re-establishment of Jewish communal life. YDIP was renamed, practically it remained in operation, was renamed as the Central Service for the Clearing and Reimbursement of Jewish Properties, but controversially continued to administer Jewish assets and appointing custodians all the way to 1945-1946, practically meaning after the end of the war. Despite the realization of the magnitude of the crime against the Jews and the plunder of their properties, the return process proved to be extremely difficult. The long-suffering survived Jews and the Jewish community of Thessaloniki that struggled to find the needing resources to take care of for those that they were saved, remained alive, was quite difficult because of this unfavorable public bureaucracy, long-lasting court rulings, and legal obstacles. The same applied especially in the Jewish houses, since many displaced, as I said, refugee Greek Christian families still lived there. We had the phenomenon of a Jewish family, if they remained alive, returning to its house and living only in a part of it, since the other families continued to live with them. So what was the legal context in the post-war period? It's quite important to understand, that you have the laws, but the problem is the pending implementation of them. In terms of the legal context development, Law 367 provisioned the reconstruction of the Jewish communities and the establishment of the Central Board of Jewish Communities in Greece, that was established as a legal entity under public law. The creation of KISS, this is the acronym of the organization, enabled the centralized representation of Jewish communities to the Greek state and the pursuit of the demands of the survived Jews. We had roughly 12,000 people remained alive out of the 80,000 people before the war. A few months later, compulsory law 808, supplementing an early legislative provisions, laid the foundation for the restitution of Jewish-owned real estate and other property. Article 9 of the law stipulated the creation of a special Jewish agency tasked with the collection, inventory, administration, management, and restitution of Jewish properties that were under the control of the Greek state, practically meaning 1945. Effectively, that they were all, as we saw in the third party, these custodians, that they were controlling them. It is important to emphasize that the issue pertained not only to Jewish-owned real estate, but also to Jewish leases of urban properties, both residential and commercial. That is, properties practically meaning rented by Jews. Less than a month later, another compulsory law, 846, which abolished the inheritance rights of the Greek state over so-called vacant Jewish estates. Usually what is happening in all the abandoned, or when you don't have heirs in some properties, when the owner passes away, the state comes and retrieves this property for its own rights, okay? It becomes the legal owner. So with this law, Greece annulled this provision that it was in the legal code at the benefit of this Jewish entity that it was supposedly going to be established. According to the law, the purpose of the organization, this new organization, would be the care and rehabilitation of the survived Jews of Greece. Despite these legal developments, implementation lagged dramatically. Very few properties were returned, and the restitution agency, the famous one, foreseen by the law, remained unrealized for years, remained pending. This raised serious concerns about the Greek state's intentions. Which were the reactions? Concerning the reaction towards the prospect for the restitution of the Jewish properties, those who had received them, all these Jewish real estate, houses and shops, showed their reluctance to return it. The strongest reactions came from people associated with the collaborationist regime, or those whose financial stake was high. The truth is that immediately after the liberation, many of the custodians' trustees were imprisoned or held as accountable for collaborationism. That was a general trend immediately after the war in Europe. But soon after, the situation altered. This didn't happen only in Greece. You know, it progressively it happened in all the countries. The country was already, but soon after the situation altered, the country was already in a great division, a turmoil that eventually led to a civil war in 1946 till 1949 between the Greek state and the Greek rebels that they were controlled by the Greek Communist Party. Out of more than 175 cases and 700 people, 80 people that they were accused or persecuted for collaborationism associated with the expropriation of Jewish property, less than 35 being sentenced and in light sentence. I mean, they remained a few months and then they got out of the prison. In 1947, a report by the Greek Ministry of Foreign Affairs noted that less than 60 to 100 Jewish professional outlets were returned to the Jewish owners or their heirs. Although there were court decisions ruling in favor for the return of the properties, they were postponed after intervention by the Ministry of Justice. So amid this dysfunction, as the report mentioned, many Jews sold their rights to properties at minimal prices and migrated primarily to Palestine. The Greek police, this is based in documents retrieved, even advised prospective buyers to apply pressure to further devalue the Greek Jewish assets. This widespread obstruction created a powerful, informal political lobby of some thousands of these trustees, custodians, and new property holders who wielded considerable influence during this period of turmoil. International attention increased, and Greek diplomatic missions abroad faced criticism from foreign media, which exposed the gap between Greece's progressive restitution laws and its lack of enforcement. Although Greece was one of the first countries to legislate at the benefit of the survived Jews, was among the last to implement any kind of these provisions. During this period, another completely unrelated development exerted pressure at the Greek side to settle the pending situation. In 1948, Greece undersigned the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. Among the 30 articles in total that safeguarded individual, social, political, and economic rights, Article 17 included a specific provision regarding the inalienable right to property. So I quote, "Everyone has the right to own property alone as well as in association with others. No one shall arbitrarily deprived of their property." This is crucial because in Western Europe, the protection of private property, contrary to what was happening in Eastern Europe, that we had the impose of socialist regimes by the Soviet Union, this difference was quite crucial. This particular article, fundamental to the human rights to property, left no room for misinterpretation, nor did it recognize any right to limit the enjoyment of it, the enjoying of having your own property. For Greece itself, which was in need of a collective security system and whose territorial integrity was being directly challenged by the civil war and the communist insurgency, participation in international treaties, bodies, and organizations constituted a clear diplomatic move of strategic significance, because there was a fear that probably a part of the northern territories of Greece will be annexed by the Greek communists and probably will be considered to be a foreign or different or an independent state, like we have still North and South Korea, or like we had North and South Vietnam. The same could apply for Greece. At fairly the same time, with the Declaration of Human Rights, Greece was in negotiations with the Western European countries for the establishment of an organization that will be known as the Council of Europe, and along with its European Court of Human Rights, is considered to be the leading human rights organization in the world. The establishment of the Council of Europe was sealed with the European Convention of Human Rights and Article 1 of the first protocol, binding. These articles were binding in all signatories of the convention, stipulates the protection of the right to private property. Another practical factor to be taken into consideration is that Greece implicated the creation of the new Greek Jewish organization. Its name will be OPAIE, with the developments in the Middle East. To any surprise, the Greek side informed the Central Jewish Board of Greece, KIS, that the establishment of the organization to restitute the Greek Jewish properties will be determined only after the resolve of the pending issues concerning Greek properties and real estate in the new territories that became part of the established state of Israel in 1948. To be clearer, there was even more specific. There was one specific case of the wife of a Greek diplomat and cabinet member who had land property in the neighborhood of Brenner in the suburbs of Tel Aviv and was occupied by Jewish refugees. Practically, to the modest protests, you can understand the contradiction of Greek and international Jewish organization, an internal Jewish issue of Greece that concerned Greeks that had Jewish religion, became an international bilateral state issue between Greece and the State of Israel. When pending matters for this specific Greek estate, the specific one of this lady, in Israel was solved, the Jewish National Fund purchased it at a good price, fairly good price. Everything was ready. So a few weeks later, in March 1949, and this is, let's say, the new development in our research, OPAIE, the Organization for the Relief and Rehabilitation of Greek Jews, a public organization administered by Greek Jews, finally was established with a royal decree. It took almost 5 years after the end of the war in Greece and 3 years after the first law to form the legal entity that would claim the return of the Jewish assets. what about the operation of this organization? OPAIE created offices all over Greece where the Jewish communities were able to be reconstituted. Of course, the most important office was established in Greece because of the size of the community during the pre-war period. As it seemed, OPAIE office in Thessaloniki concentrated the efforts to restore ownership over the Jewish real estate. Since the formation of the office in June 1949, and for 6 months period, all those who claimed legal inheritance rights were able to apply to OPAIE to receive the property or the properties of their relatives that they perished during the Holocaust. After this 6-month period, they had to go in courts. They had to follow the legal procedure. Eligible to exert legal claims were relatives up to the 4th grade of relationship. And in many cases, OPAIE had to do thorough checks for this relative relation for years before it will return these properties to the rightful owners. There were also cases that no relative remained alive because we have wiped out of entire families. So OPAIE claimed this inheritance right, and these remained under its custody. YDIP, the previous state agency from the years of occupation, started handing over to OPAIE hundreds, it was rather around 2,700 cases, of files concerning Jewish properties that needed to be thoroughly checked by the new organization. The first OPAIE employees did in Thessaloniki, the first thing that they did was to set up a system to follow concerning each Jewish real estate, and soon enough spent lots of time in the land registry agency, where they checked everything that had to do with Jewish property status, as also with selling or purchasing, especially during the Second World War, because people in need during the occupation period sold out their goods, at minimum prices in order to survive from famine. The Greek state after the war provisioned with 2 specific laws, one in 1946 and one in 1949, the annulment of all transactions that took place during the occupation period, acknowledging the problem that was created. This wasn't directed only in Greek Jews, but to everyone, that sold its property or purchased property during the occupation period. OPAIE checked hundreds of these cases and exerted its legal rights in courts. In most of the cases, usually, compromise between sellers and buyers is noted with supplementary payment, meaning at market price in the post-war period. I should be clear here that not only Jews were selling some of the properties, but also some of them they were purchased by Jews. So even OPAIE was among those that were implicated in courts, because some people that they lost their properties and the buyer was perished in the Holocaust, and OPAIE became the legal owner of this property, had to go to courts to solve up the case. It took years for OPAIE to restore order, and in the first period, strong reactions by the group of trustees, custodians, were noted. In 1950, they formed a new union of trustees, and in 1951, they proceeded in local protests to revert, but in vain, the situation. Using administrators, mechanical engineers, lawyers, notaries, etc., the new organization checked thoroughly all Jewish real estate properties, received and carefully matched inheritance applications. Each property received an identity number and a file containing all info, such contracts, names of owners, their fate, relatives, property floor plans, lease contracts, payouts, delays, and all these were compiled by the OPAIE officers and was thoroughly updated till the closure of the case and the handover of the property to the rightful owner. In some cases, the return of properties, as I said, took decades to be fulfilled because of the bureaucratic procedures and the detailed checking of relationship status, since courts had to be involved. Personally, I have checked more than 300 cases of Jewish properties in various streets in Thessaloniki, and I didn't find a single case of loss. I don't mean by that probably there were losses, but the vast majority of the Jewish real estate returned back to Opaye, and it was given to the rightful owners. Before getting to my conclusions, I will briefly comment on the Romaniot Jewish community of Ioannina. Romaniot Jews were those that spoke Greek. As it is evident from the archives, the establishment of Opaye in Ioannina delayed since Thessaloniki was in the center of the interest of Opaye. It came 1 year later in 1950. From the archives, it is evident that 106 shops and enterprises and at least 304 houses of Jewish ownership were returned to Opaye. They were matched and the adequate inheritance rights applications were checked, and all these were returned. To conclude, Opaye operated for decades in all Greek towns with sizable Jewish communities, with main task the return of all Jewish assets. Since movable wealth, Jewish wealth, was looted and liquidated during the Second World War period, it was extremely difficult to reveal and claim anything but few. When we talk few, is exaggeration of the whole picture that we have. For this reason, Opaye concentrated its effort in the Jewish real estate. Having this task, it managed to claim and receive, if not all, most of the confiscated Jewish real estate properties. Through a research program, as I told you, and during COVID pandemic, I've checked with my associates all these cases in various streets. We haven't found any kind of loss. Thus, in contrast with the looting of movable wealth, the Jewish real estate properties were preserved thanks in the establishment and the operation of Opaye. Although with considerable delay and amidst contradicting attitude by Greek public services, order was restored and the Jewish properties were returned to the rightful owners according to the law, finally. Thank you very much.
Do you have any kind of statistics or numbers of the survivors' families having moved back?
Yes, I mean, I haven't done this research. There were other colleagues that did it. We have, as I said, around 12,000 people that remained alive. The vast majority of them migrated in Palestine. We had less than 4,000 to 5,000 people that remained in Greece, and now it is less than 2,000 to 3,000 people in Greece, their descendants. I mean, most of the people, it's quite difficult to remain in a country, and especially in Thessaloniki. There was one testimony that we have from one survivor that said, I returned to the city, and this wasn't my city actually anymore. I couldn't trace anyone. I couldn't find my neighborhood. I couldn't find any relative. This psychological effect in those people was so enormous that they decided to leave. Some of them never returned in Greece. Some of them, especially, we had a few cases of Sonderkommandos that, like Shlomo Venetia, that he was from the western part of Thessaloniki, from a very poor family. He was fluent in Italian because he was an Italian subject in Thessaloniki. And after his survival as a Sonderkommandos was these Jews in the death camps that they were assigned with all the tasks that had to do with the carryover of the gas chambers, the bodies, putting them in the ovens and all this stuff. So these people, some of them that they remained alive, there were few of them that they were Greeks, never returned back, or they left immediately afterwards.
There's no happy story exactly in there, but there's kind of bad and worse, I felt, like places where it could turn in one direction or the other. And you raised two interesting legal issues that I thought were these turning points potentially. And one, at least two, one was, you mentioned when the state removes its interest, right, in abandoned properties. And you mentioned the issue of enjoyment of property that may have been a blind spot, right, in the European Human Rights Convention. I'm thinking a bit of Turkey right now, where like I'm sure these are live issues in Greece as well. I'm interested how they play out, but the abandoned properties issue for Armenians and Jews and probably and Greeks is still live there, and I'm familiar with it from archaeology, where when the guardians say there are no descendants, the state then goes even farther back, and the private person is able to dig there and do all kinds of things. Which so in Greece, how do you see that that turning point where in 1946 or whatever, where the state withdrew its interest there, and how it affects the right of the community through Opaya to enjoy it? I'm thinking of Opaya must exist today, right?
Yes, yes.
Right. So they must own properties.
Yep.
Right. And those and who pays to secure those properties is what I was thinking, because the cost of securing those properties is part of the cost of enjoying them.
Yes.
You know, of course, against domestic and foreign terrorism.
What do you mean by securing them?
I mean actually securing them. Like in Turkey, for example, it is prohibitive, or the state says it's prohibitive. It's an issue in Jewish cultural heritage today. In Izmir, for example, to physically secure Jewish sites.
Wow.
So, I mean, it obviously costs something. I mean, security costs. So, but that's just one cost I thought of. There must be other costs that Opaya faces that it has to share potentially with the state as a public-private entity.
Yeah, that's true. It's not private entity. It's a state entity. But the interesting thing is that immediately when Opaya was established, because we had to say also these things, some public employees from the land registry, from the Ministry of Finance, got to Opaya asking for the property taxes from 1943 all the way to 1949. So Opaya couldn't say anything because it retrieved the properties in 1949. You know, he couldn't pay for these taxes when it wasn't, you know, it wasn't the legal owner of this property. So you see this contradiction. Of course, I believe that the Greek state faced a quite embarrassing situation because, first of all, it was doing a kind of social policy, having especially the houses, because it couldn't house all these thousands of people that they were refugees during the occupation period, the Greek Christians, that still remained in the Jewish households, first of all. So it wanted time, you know, to see what was going on. Second, is because the reaction, the magnitude of the loss, when the Holocaust was learned, I mean, was what happened, it was a great shock, not only for the Greek community, for Europe in general. So that is why I believe, and under considerable pressure, that they decided to give back the property. We know that in Eastern Europe, most of the confiscated properties, Jewish properties, never returned back because it was considered to be state property. Opaya, for instance, there's another case that is quite interesting. The Dodecanese Islands, it's these 12 islands. Here's Turkey. So the Dodecanese Islands, during that period, before the Second World War, it was considered to be Italian territory. So when Italy was capitulated in 1943 and the Germans assumed the occupation of the Dodecanese Islands, they deported, during the last weeks, in July 1943, they deported the Jews of Rhodes, almost entirely wiping out the Jewish community. After the war, the Dodecanese Islands in 1948 were incorporated in the Greek state. It became part of Greece. However, the properties of the Jews that they lived there, they were considered to be properties of subjects of enemy state, of Italy. Although the Greek Christians returned as legal owners, the Greek Jews didn't, actually because nobody almost remained alive, but for decades it was pending. An Opaea case returned again a few years ago, and they are in court to receive back these properties, meaning after almost 70 years, they're still in court and they have already favorable decisions. I mean, it's evident. So it was a quite contradicting case, but I have to admit, that was the surprise. The surprise for us is that all us that we were involved in Jewish issues about the Holocaust, about what happened, about the post-war period, we ended up our research up to 1947, 1948, because we didn't have any clues. We didn't have any archives, what happened. So most of us, not most of us, all of us, we considered that everything perished. And this was quite unfair for the Greek state that even with this considerable delay, it returned the properties. And to make you understand, because it's quite, it's quite sensitive. When I presented the book in Thessaloniki, the book that was based in this research that I briefly commented to you, lectured to you, and I presented, of course, because it was the opening, it was the presentation of the book. I didn't want to take all the rabbits out of the hat to tell what happened, because they had to purchase the book, they had to buy the book. So it was an auditorium full of, 350, 400 people, and each one had to tell a story about their uncle, about their aunt. They knew a property that someone else took it, and they dig it, and they found the gold that was hid, and they sold the properties, and they became rich afterwards. And at the end, I had to say the fact, I had to take out the rabbit and say that all movable wealth perished, was looted, and be aware that probably the size of the movable wealth, was even greater than the properties, because during the occupation period, Jewish real estate, in general real estate, didn't cost anything, because many people were liquidating whatever they could in order to have money, not money, gold liras, in order to exchange them and to survive from the famine and all the effects of the occupation. So I said that everything that has to do with movable wealth perished, but all the Jewish real estate was preserved. And this was a shock, to be honest, for most. And actually, we discussed it thoroughly, for 2 years to understand and comprehend the whole situation. This is why sometimes I'm skeptical when we discuss about public history and the importance of it. It's true, but still you have to be based in facts in order to claim about these things. So, Polly,
yeah.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Andreas, for a fascinating talk. I'll monopolize the fact that I'm next to the previous questioner, but I absolutely think students should be asking questions too. So I'm curious about the way in which Opaea had to rely on legal records kept by the Nazis and the occupation authorities. Could you elaborate a bit more on that? And could we go beyond this story of institutions, right, to a story of individuals? Did Opaea, I'm sure I'm mispronouncing this, but did they also hire people who were involved in the occupation and who were involved in this institution that oversaw Jewish property during occupation, or definitely not. Okay. But presumably there's some human knowledge that's being passed along and not just documentary knowledge. So could you say a bit more on that?
Yes. What happened is that, first of all, going in the land registry offices all around Greece was the first step to secure what was going on, because they inventoried everything that has to do with Jewish names and property rights. Everything. Not only what was sold or was purchased, but everything. So they have the lists from the land registry offices, and then they compare them with the ones that they got from this state agency that it was in operation during the occupation period. The second step is that they searched that from all witnesses, by survivors or by friends, that we know that there was a plot, in the other side of the city or up in the mountains that belonged to a Jew, that he was a relative. I mean, they checked thousands of cases. I mean, in one case, they went even beyond the borders in Yugoslavia to try to find if there were properties that belonged to Greek Jews that perished during the Holocaust. So I believe that, and it was also, it was also a case that it was quite sensitive, meaning that in special cases like in Corfu, for instance, in Corfu, we had a direct cooperation of the Greek local authorities with the Nazi authorities in the deportation of the Greek Jews. It was quite, discreet, this whole procedure, how to go on, because you were talking with people that they were in the next door. I mean, that they took, for instance, the store of a friend, or we had court decisions that were in half in the beginning, meaning that someone occupied a small store, the owner returned from the mountains, so the judge said, okay, we're going to split the store for 3 years, so the Christian guy will remain in half of it, still he is poor and he has to survive as well, and the rest of it will be to the Jew who is the owner, and then at the end of these 3 years we will re-examine the case, okay, and probably give it back. I mean, it was quite difficult. But as I witnessed, we didn't face great challenges for the operation of Upaye. I mean, it was probably very from above a decision of the Greek state to have order in the whole situation.
So I have a question. Since the vast majority of people were murdered, and you could see, maybe you'd have some synagogues or, who is living in most of these houses that are then restored? Because I think you said at least in certain places there were 300 cases, 300 or 400 cases. There were tens of thousands of properties.
Yes. Not tens of thousands, some thousands, let's say.
Okay, thousands of properties where previously all these people lived. So I was still a little, and it was a fascinating lecture, so very interesting. But I was still confused. Okay, well, because it seems like you're saying most of the, if not all the properties were returned, but the numbers of 300 or 400 don't seem to match what would have been the properties. So that's one question. The second question is, because you're saying, in some places 97% of the people were murdered, who is actually living? Is it the descendants that are, let's say, the 4,000 or 5,000 people, and they have their grandchildren and great-grandchildren that are living in all these places? Or some of them synagogues and other things that are open to the public and are kind of museums now? But that was still a little bit confusing to me. Yeah.
What is the case? In Ioannina, that was the 300 and 400 cases. Ioannina, we had around 1,500 people. So having 300 houses, ownership, is matching with the number of people that they were deported. In Thessaloniki's case, we had less numbers. We had, because it was supposedly discussed that it was 10, 12,000 properties. It wasn't like that. That's why I said that we had around 2,500, 2,700 cases. And this, when we're talking about these properties, probably going to be a hut or a shack in the poor neighborhoods of Thessaloniki, but it can be a condominium. That practically means that you have 30 apartments in this building in the centrally located streets that had considerable Jewish presence. So the main problem that the Jews that remained alive, the survived Jews that they faced immediately afterwards, is that they came back without any kind of belonging, without having anything, and they had to survive. So during this period, some of the synagogues, of the communal buildings that the Jewish community of Thessaloniki had and was returned to them, because some of them weren't given because they were big houses or warehouses that they had the German occupation authorities used them. So immediately afterwards, they got it back. They had to sell them. They had to liquidate them in order to support the people that remained alive. In Corfu, we had the case that people, the returned Jews, I think there were around 135 people. They stayed in the old Jewish school, but it was right in the center of the town. It was quite dark, without windows, because it was, the looting was, they took even the windows and the store and the door cases, and they had to survive. So and of course, it is true that the Greek state compensate in some cases, provided a kind of financial aid, but it was a distracted country. I mean, and we had the great risk was of course the civil war. Okay, so everything else was coming second. So I don't know if I reply to everything, but the truth is, especially in Thessaloniki, we had a case in the western part of Thessaloniki that it's the poor side of the city. We had some cases where it wasn't acknowledged Jewish land ownership. Why was that? Most of the Jews lived till 1917 in the center of the city, in the old center of the city. And we had a huge fire in 1917. This is during the First World War. In order, 70,000 people remained, after the destruction, remained homeless. You know, they have lost everything. So what they did is that the Jewish community was given some pieces of land in the western neighborhoods, as also the municipality, and they constructed some Jewish neighborhoods with some, you know, very basic houses, okay, and many others came also and they made, you know, illegal huts, and I mean, there were barracks. It wasn't exactly, you know. So after the war, when Opaie was established, the Greek state didn't acknowledge land property ownership in these parcels of land. They acknowledged only property rights for Opaie on what was on top of the land, meaning in these houses, if they still existed. So they said, you know, that either you can take them and sell, you know, whatever you can get out of it, okay, but the land remained to the Greek state. So, and I guess that in some cases, when we discuss about what happened and that, you know, the general, this public history narration that everything was lost, was also because of these cases. Anyone else? Your last chance. Okay. Thank you very much for being with us.